back to our lecture on complex designs, Chapter 8. In this lecture, I'll talk about the basics of factorial designs. What are the limits of a factorial design? Well, really, you can have as many factors or as many independent variables as you like. However, keep in mind that the more factors that you have, the more complicated this design is. Most factorial designs do not encompass more than 2 or 3 independent variables. This is certainly one time when you're creating an experiment that you want to engage in parsimony. A simpler design that better answers your question is going to be much preferred over a more complex design that does not necessarily as clearly answer the question that you were researching. Okay, you say, I'm going to do just 2 independent variables, 2 factors. Well, now you need to decide how many groups or levels you have for each of those factors. Once you have 2 or more independent variables, you're using a factorial design no matter what. The number of levels that you have for each factor here is really unimportant. You're going to be doing this complicated type of design no matter what. Again, I would stick with the rule of parsimony. Only include what you need to include in your decision regarding the number of levels. One of the things that you may have noticed when reading factorial designs is it typically has some sort of notation that goes along with it. And the notation that's commonly used factorial design is called A by B. A by B is essentially a formula where we can insert numbers into the A portion and we can insert numbers into the B portion to tell people very quickly how many independent variables there are and what the value of each independent variable is. For example, if we were to look at the number of numbers that we have a number here and a number here. That would be 2 numbers. So therefore, there would be 2 independent variables in this example. Value of each number that you would have in these places would tell you how many levels that independent variable has. For example, when we're looking at notations here, a 2 by 2 design would have 2 independent variables because there are literally 2 values here. This first independent variable has 2 levels. This second independent variable also has 2 levels. So again, keep in mind, the number of numbers tells you how many independent variables there are. The value of each number tells you how many levels that independent variable has. So let's go ahead and practice. How many independent variables and how many levels do each of the following factorial designs have? Take a moment, push pause. Okay, let's go through the answers here. The first example here, this has 2 independent variables. The first independent variable has 4 levels. The second IV has 3 levels. Again, the number of numbers tells me how many independent variables there are. The value of each number tells you how many levels that independent variable has. Let's go through this example here. We have 3 independent variables in this example. The first independent variable here has 2 levels. The second independent variable here has 3 levels, while our third independent variable has 5 levels. Last here is our most complicated design. We have 4 independent variables here. Our first independent variable has 2 levels. Our second independent variable here has 3 levels. Our third independent variable here has 7 levels. Oh my. And our fourth independent variable here has 8 levels. Again, the big takeaway here is just understand what the notation means. The number of numbers is how many independent variables there are. The value of each number tells you how many levels that independent variable has. At this point, you may be wondering, why did I call this an A by B design, especially when there's so many numbers here? When we refer to factors, we often refer to them by letters. So the first factor is labeled factor A, the second factor is factor B, and so on. When we look at our levels here, they're designated by the level that corresponds to the factor and the number that differentiates the levels. So if we had two levels in our first factor, they would be A1 and A2. Again, these are just notations that make referring to each factor clear and specific. Thank you for your attention.